Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. We're Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to question you about household employees.
I live alone. This is my home. You need to leave my property.
We received information you're employing undocumented workers. Step out now so we can verify.
I know my rights. Unless you have a warrant, you're trespassing on my property. Okay, that's illegal. Stop resisting. Hands behind your back.
I'm not
You're under arrest for obstruction.
Stop resisting.
I'm being forcibly removed from my car without a warrant.
This is on camera.
The woman standing in her own driveway wasn't resisting. She was explaining. Calmly, clearly, with the kind of measured authority that comes from 20 years on the federal bench. But the two ICE agents blocking her car didn't care about her explanation. They didn't care that she'd just shown them her driver's license with her home address matching the driveway they were standing in. They didn't care that she'd told them 3 times she was a U.S. citizen born in Philadelphia. What they cared about was the anonymous tip they'd received claiming someone at this address was employing undocumented workers. And when Judge Diane Marshall told them for the 4th time that she lived alone, that she was a federal judge, that they needed to leave her property immediately, Agent Kevin Foster grabbed her arm and said the words that would end his career. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for obstruction." The Ring doorbell camera captured everything. Every word. Every illegal action. Every moment of 2 federal agents arresting a sitting federal judge in her own driveway without a warrant, without probable cause, without a single shred of legal justification. And unlike body cameras that can malfunction or be turned off, this footage was already uploading to the cloud, time-stamped, permanent, completely outside their control. Before this goes any further, if you believe badges don't put anyone above the law, hit subscribe. Because what happened to Judge Diane Marshall in her own driveway will make you furious. But what happened to the agents who arrested her might restore your faith that accountability is still possible. Judge Diane Marshall was 52 years old, appointed to the federal bench for the District of Columbia 12 years earlier. She'd graduated from Howard University, then Yale Law School, spent 15 years as a prosecutor and defense attorney before her appointment. She was known for her fairness, her sharp legal mind, and her zero tolerance for constitutional violations in her courtroom. She lived in a quiet neighborhood in Northwest D.C., a townhouse she'd bought 10 years ago, lived alone after her divorce, no children, no employees, just her and a career dedicated to justice. That Wednesday afternoon in June, she'd left chambers early with a migraine. She drove home at 3:47 p.m., pulled into her driveway, was gathering her briefcase and purse when a dark SUV blocked her in. Agent Kevin Foster was 38, 9 years with ICE, a file thick with civilian complaints about aggressive tactics and racial profiling. His partner was Agent Rachel Klein, 31, 5 years in, known for following Foster's lead without asking questions. They'd received an anonymous tip that morning claiming someone at Judge Marshall's address was employing undocumented immigrants as domestic workers. The tip gave no names, no specifics, just an address and an allegation. Foster ran the address, saw it was a single-family residence in an upscale neighborhood, and decided to investigate without bothering to verify anything first. No database check on the resident. No coordination with local police. No warrant. Just 2 agents with badges and assumptions. The Ring camera shows their SUV pulling up at 3:51 p.m., blocking Judge Marshall's car in the driveway. She's still in her vehicle, confused, watching them approach. Foster reaches her driver's side window before she can even process what's happening. The camera has a clear angle on both of them. "Excuse me, ma'am. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to speak with you about your household employees." Judge Marshall's face shows immediate confusion followed by controlled irritation. "I don't have household employees. I live alone. This is my home. Can I help you with something?" Foster steps closer to her car door. "We received information that you're employing undocumented workers at this residence. We need to verify. Information from who?" Judge Marshall asks, her legal mind already processing the problems with this encounter. "And verify what exactly? I just told you I live alone." Klein moves around to the passenger side of Judge Marshall's car, cutting off that angle. "Ma'am, we need you to step out of the vehicle so we can have this conversation properly." Judge Marshall doesn't move. "No, you're on my property. You've approached me without identifying a specific complaint. I'm a federal judge. I know my rights. And unless you have a warrant, you need to leave my driveway immediately. Foster's expression hardens. A federal judge. Sure. Ma'am, we still need to verify the information we received. Are you refusing to cooperate with a federal investigation? I'm telling you I live alone. Judge Marshall says, her voice steady but her patience thinning. I have no employees. Your information is wrong. Now please leave my property. Foster exchanges a look with Klein. The look says they don't believe her. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle. We're going to need to see identification and ask you some questions. Judge Marshall reaches into her purse, pulls out her wallet, extracts her driver's license, and holds it up to her window where Foster can see it clearly. This is my license. This address matches this driveway. My name is Diane Marshall. I'm a federal judge for the D.C. District Court. I live here alone. You have no legal basis to be on my property. Please leave. Foster barely glances at the license. We still need to verify your immigration status and the status of anyone residing here. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Judge Marshall's eyes narrow. My immigration status? I was born in Philadelphia. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a federal judge. And I'm ordering you to leave my property right now before this becomes a much bigger problem for you than it already is. Klein tries a softer approach. Ma'am, if you just cooperate, we can resolve this quickly. We need to confirm there are no undocumented workers at this residence. Judge Marshall turns to face Klein directly. I've confirmed that 3 times. I live alone. I'm a judge. I don't have to prove my citizenship to you in my own driveway. And you don't have a warrant, which means you're trespassing. For the last time, leave. Foster reaches for her car door handle. Ma'am, you're being uncooperative. That's suspicious. We're detaining you for questioning. Judge Marshall pulls her phone from her purse. I'm calling 911. You're trespassing and attempting an illegal detention. Foster grabs the car door, yanks it open. Judge Marshall recoils, phone to her ear. The 911 operator answers. This is Judge Diane Marshall. I'm at my home and 2 IC agents are attempting to illegally detain me without a warrant. I need DC. Police immediately. Foster reaches into the car, grabs Judge Marshall's arm. Ma'am, put the phone down. You're under arrest for obstruction of a federal investigation. Judge Marshall pulls back. You're arresting a federal judge in her own driveway without probable cause? Are you insane? This is on camera. Everything you're doing is being recorded. Foster doesn't care, or doesn't believe her. He pulls harder on her arm, forcing her out of the vehicle. Klein moves in to help. Judge Marshall isn't fighting, but she's not making it easy either. Her phone falls, clattering on the driveway pavement. The 911 operator is still on the line, can hear everything. Get your hands off me, Judge Marshall says, her voice loud and clear for the Ring camera. I'm a federal judge. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause. This is an illegal arrest. Foster forces her arm behind her back. The angle is wrong, too high. Judge Marshall winces. Klein produces handcuffs. A neighbor, an older white man named Robert Chun, comes out of his house next door. He sees federal agents handcuffing Judge Marshall in her driveway and immediately pulls out his phone, starts recording from his porch. What's going on? Judge Marshall calls out to him. Robert, call my clerk. Sandra Reyes at the courthouse. Tell her what's happening. Robert nods, already dialing. The handcuffs click shut on Judge Marshall's wrists. She keeps talking, projecting for the cameras, for the 911 call still active on her dropped phone, for her neighbor recording. My name is Judge Diane Marshall. I'm a federal judge for the D.C. District Court. I'm being arrested in my own driveway by ICE agents Kevin Foster and Rachel Klein without a warrant, without probable cause. The date is Wednesday, June 14th. The time is approximately 3:58 p.m. I have committed no crime. Foster walks her toward the SUV. Klein picks up Judge Marshall's dropped phone, sees the 911 call active, and ends it. She drops the phone back on the ground. They put Judge Marshall in the back of the vehicle at 4:01 p.m., 10 minutes after pulling into her driveway. Robert Chin has the whole arrest on his phone. The Ring camera captured everything from a different angle. And at the D.C. courthouse, Judge Marshall's clerk Sandra Reyes is getting a call that will set off a chain reaction through the federal justice system. At the ICE field office, they brought Judge Marshall into an interrogation room. She sat in handcuffs for 23 minutes before anyone came in. When Foster finally entered with Klein, Judge Marshall spoke first. "I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and my Sixth Amendment right to an attorney. I will not answer any questions. And when this is over, both of you will be unemployed and possibly in prison." Foster sits across from her. "Ma'am, we have credible information that you're employing undocumented immigrants. We need names." "I'm a federal judge," Judge Marshall says slowly, like she's explaining to a child. "I preside over federal cases. I live alone. Your information is fabricated or you have the wrong address. Either way, you've arrested a sitting federal judge without cause. Do you understand what you've done?" Klein shifts uncomfortably. She's starting to realize this might actually be true. Foster plows ahead. "If you're really a judge, proving that should be easy. Show us credentials." "I showed you my driver's license in my driveway," Judge Marshall says. "You arrested me anyway. I don't have to prove anything to you. You need probable cause to arrest someone. You don't have it. What you have is a lawsuit that's going to cost you everything." The door opens. Not a supervisor. The ICE deputy director for the D.C. region, a man named Thomas Wright, enters with 2 FBI agents and a lawyer from the Justice Department. Wright's face is ashen. He looks at Judge Marshall in handcuffs, then at Foster and Klein. "Both of you, now." Judge Marshall is released at 4:37 p.m., 36 minutes after being arrested. Her attorney, Marcus Bell, was already there. A civil rights lawyer she'd known for years who dropped everything when Sandra called. The D.C. police chief was there. A representative from the federal judiciary. And 3 reporters who'd somehow already heard. The drive back to Judge Marshall's home was silent except for Marcus making calls. To the ACLU. To the federal judiciary's administrative office. To every oversight agency with jurisdiction over ICE. When they arrived at her townhouse at 5:14 p.m., news vans were already lining the street. Judge Marshall stood in her driveway, the same spot where she'd been arrested an hour and a half earlier, and gave a statement to cameras. Her voice was calm, but the fury underneath was volcanic. "This afternoon, 2 ICE agents came to my home without a warrant. They accused me of employing undocumented workers despite my repeated explanations that I live alone. When I invoked my rights and told them to leave my property, they arrested me. I am a federal judge. I was arrested in my own driveway for refusing to submit to an illegal detention. What happened to me today is what happens to people every day. People who don't have law degrees. People who don't have colleagues in the federal judiciary. People who don't have the resources to fight back. The difference is I do, and I will." The investigation started within hours. The FBI interviewed Judge Marshall. They reviewed the Ring camera footage. They reviewed Robert Chen's cell phone video. They listened to the 911 call recording. They seized Foster and Klein's service weapons and badges. By evening, both agents were on administrative leave. By the next morning, their personnel files were being reviewed by federal investigators who found the pattern almost immediately. In 4 years, Foster had conducted 67 immigration enforcement actions in the D.C. area. 61 targeted people of color. 47 ended with release after determining the person was a citizen or legal resident. He was stopping people based on race and assumption, not evidence. Klein had participated in 38 of those stops. Her pattern mirrored his. Judge Marshall filed her federal lawsuit 6 weeks later. The complaint was devastating. False arrest, unlawful detention, trespass, assault, battery, violation of Fourth Amendment rights, deprivation of civil rights under color of law. She named Foster and Klein personally and ICE as an agency. The complaint included something unusual. A detailed analysis written by Judge Marshall herself of every legal violation committed during her arrest, footnoted with case law, written with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years interpreting constitutional law. It read less like a complaint and more like a judicial opinion destroying the defendants. The case went to trial 9 months later in federal court. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A federal judge suing federal agents in federal court. The jury was diverse. 3 black jurors, 2 Latino, 1 Asian American, 6 white jurors from various backgrounds. They watched the Ring camera footage. They watched Robert Chen's cell phone video. They listened to the 911 call where Judge Marshall calmly identified herself while being forcibly removed from her car. They heard her voice, steady and clear. "I'm a federal judge. You have no warrant. This is illegal." Judge Marshall testified about arriving home with a migraine, finding agents blocking her driveway, explaining repeatedly that she lived alone. "I told them I was a federal judge. I showed them my license with my address. I explained I had no employees. They didn't care. They decided I was lying, and nothing I said mattered. When I invoked my rights, they arrested me, in my own driveway, for refusing to submit to an illegal detention." Her voice was steady, but the violation was clear in every word. "I've spent 20 years on the bench upholding the Constitution. That afternoon, 2 agents violated every protection that document provides, and they did it to a federal judge who knew exactly what they were doing wrong." The cross-examination was brief. The defense had almost nothing to work with. "Agent Foster, when Judge Marshall told you she was a federal judge, what did you think?" "I thought she was lying to avoid questioning." "Did you attempt to verify that claim?" "No." "Why not?" "I didn't believe it was true." "You didn't believe a well-dressed woman in her 50s, in an upscale neighborhood, driving a late-model car, with a driver's license showing the address where you found her, might actually be a federal judge?" The prosecutor let that question hang in the air. "Agent Foster, how many federal judges have you met who were lying about their identity?" Foster had no answer. Klein's testimony was worse. She admitted she'd followed Foster's lead without questioning whether they had legal grounds for the arrest. She admitted she'd heard Judge Marshall invoke her rights multiple times. She admitted she'd ended the 911 call to prevent further documentation. She admitted the entire arrest felt wrong, but she did it anyway because Foster was the senior agent and she trusted his judgment. The defense tried to claim qualified immunity, but the prosecution brought in constitutional law experts who testified that arresting someone in their own driveway without a warrant or probable cause violates clearly established Fourth Amendment protections that every law enforcement officer should know. Professor David Washington from Georgetown Law testified about the legal standard. The Fourth Amendment is unambiguous. You cannot arrest someone without probable cause. Being in your own driveway, refusing to answer questions about employees you don't have, is not probable cause. These agents had no legal basis for this arrest from the first moment to the last. Judge Marshall's testimony was particularly significant. As a sitting federal judge, she literally teaches these principles from the bench. To have agents violate her rights so flagrantly shows a systematic disregard for constitutional protections. The prosecution's closing argument was delivered by attorney Sarah Chun. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is extraordinary because the victim is a federal judge. But it's also ordinary because what happened to her happens every day to people who aren't judges. Federal agents made assumptions based on an anonymous tip. They approached someone on private property without a warrant. They refused to accept that person's explanations. They arrested that person for asserting constitutional rights. The only difference is Judge Marshall knew the law well enough to articulate exactly why the arrest was illegal while it was happening. And that's why we're here. Because when federal agents violate a federal judge's rights this flagrantly, it exposes how often they violate everyone else's rights with impunity." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Liable. The damages phase took 2 more days. Judge Marshall's attorneys presented evidence of trauma, public humiliation, professional reputation damage. Then came the punitive damages argument. This wasn't just about compensating Judge Marshall. It was about sending an unmistakable message that badges don't override the Constitution. The jury awarded $8.7 million, $1.2 million compensatory, $7.5 million punitive. The courtroom was packed with judges, attorneys, civil rights advocates. When the amount was read, there was audible satisfaction. The presiding judge, a Reagan appointee named William Foster, no relation to the agent, delivered his own statement after the verdict. The defendants arrested a sitting federal judge in her own driveway without a warrant, without probable cause, and without any legal justification whatsoever. They did so because they made assumptions based on an anonymous tip they never verified. They did so because they refused to believe Judge Marshall when she told them the truth. This verdict reflects not only the violation of Judge Marshall's rights, but the message that must be sent. No one is above the law, and no badge authorizes you to violate constitutional protections. Foster and Klein appealed. The appeal was denied. Both agents were terminated within 2 weeks. Their law enforcement careers ended. Their names became synonymous with constitutional overreach. ICE implemented new policies requiring supervisory approval before any arrest without a warrant. Judge Marshall used part of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for people wrongfully detained by immigration enforcement. She returned to the bench 3 months after the verdict. She still lives in the same townhouse. The Ring camera still records her driveway, and every law enforcement officer in D.C. knows exactly who she is and what happens when you think your badge lets you ignore the Constitution. Years later, when asked if the settlement felt like justice, Judge Marshall's answer was measured. The money is significant, but justice would have been not being arrested in my own driveway in the first place. What we achieved was accountability. Those 2 agents can never do this to anyone else. That matters. But somewhere today, someone else is being detained without cause, arrested without warrant, violated by people who think badges make them untouchable. That's why I went back to the bench. Because the work isn't done. The Ring camera footage is now used in law enforcement training on constitutional violations. It shows exactly how quickly authority becomes criminality when officers stop following the law. 2 agents learned that lesson by destroying their careers. And somewhere in federal courtrooms across America, judges who watched one of their own be arrested without cause now scrutinize law enforcement conduct with renewed skepticism. Should federal agents who arrest people without warrants face automatic criminal prosecution? Comment below, because what happened to Judge Diane Marshall wasn't about one illegal arrest. It was about a system where agents felt comfortable arresting a federal judge because they'd been doing it to everyone else without consequences for years. If you believe constitutional rights apply to everyone equally, subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we're covering another case where someone thought their badge made them untouchable until the cameras proved otherwise.